Now, a Limerick-based documentary maker, Peter McGarry, has produced a film on the history of fatal air crashes at Shannon Airport. It's called Cleared for Disaster, and it's looking at 1946 to 1961, and he's been telling me more about it.
All of the fatal air crashes in Shannon, bar one, happened in this window, this 15-year window, which, when you think about it, it marked a time when aviation was starting to evolve, was becoming more sophisticated. The modern navigation and especially instrument landing systems, which we have today and take for granted, didn't really exist in those times. So means and methods were very different. So I initially researched these years, but the funny thing was that it was after the documentary went out that I realised, or I was advised, that there was another air crash, a fatal air crash in Shannon in 1978, which just shows you the effect of doing a documentary. It's like throwing a rock into a pond and it ripples out. So I was made aware of the digital charter flight. That's digital equipment of Galway at the time. They were a big employer in Galway. So they had bases in Puerto Rico and Boston, I believe. And this was a flight that took off from Shannon. It was a Gulfstream executive jet, made in Savannah in Georgia, by the way. And it went up in a fireball at the end of the runway. Killed everybody on board. And prior to making my documentary, I thought I knew it all, but it didn't. And I think that's the story of making a documentary.
So how many crashes are you talking about between that period then?
In my documentary, I'm focused on 5 distinct crashes, okay? Starting in 1946, the first crash was a flight that was coming in from Orly, a TWA flight, and it was to have picked up passengers and fuel in Shannon, flown to Gander, and then Gander onto New York. So I started looking at that crash in 2008, and the more I looked at it, the more interesting it became. There were 2 reasons why I focused on the first crash initially, which was my initial research in 2008. One was because the crash itself was very interesting and there was a few extremely interesting characters on board. And secondly, for a more nebulous reason, and that was that I thought in the back of my head that some point in my life I would write a historical novel, find a pivot point in history and get all of the characters involved at that fulcrum, that point. And I decided it was going to be that. So it is a Cold War novel. A novel of romance and a bit of disappointment as well, and a bit of tragedy. It's bittersweet. And the funny thing is that I took my eye off that project for many, many years. And only in the last month have I found on my storage systems at home, on my PC, the script of that novel, which is now like a phoenix out of the ashes. It's risen again. I retired this year in April after 20 years working in UHL in ophthalmology. And it's a game changer for me, and it allows me to get my teeth stuck into.
What were the reasons for crashes back then? What kind of causes were we looking at?
The prime reason for the crash, for most of the crashes, were that the technology was still evolving within aviation science. That was one reason. Other reasons, a lot of those flights were at night in poor weather conditions, poor visibility. That didn't help. But the deeper you go into these crashes, you realise that there are other factors coming into play. And only in the last week, I'll be looking at the final crash, an airline called President Airlines. And that was in September 1961, a couple of months before I was born. And
this was the worst one, was it?
It was, yeah.
Tell me about that one.
President Airways holds, or Airlines I should say, holds the record of being the single greatest crash on Irish soil, okay? So it was an airline that was, I won't say fly by night, but it was kind of run on a hodgepodge basis, and it was not in good financial shape. They were doing charters for US military called MATS flights, but they were also doing other ad hoc charters. And this was a flight from Dusseldorf in Germany, coming through Shannon, refueling Gander, New York, and on to Chicago. And most of the passengers on the flight were German farmers, believe it or not. At that point in time, it had landed in Shannon. There was a second President Airlines flight in Shannon, grounded, waiting on an engine, right? So the flight took off in shocking conditions, weather conditions. They couldn't illuminate the runway enough. So it took off in the main jet runway at the time, which is runway 23. No longer exists. It's just an apron. And within 10 to 15 seconds of it lifting off, it banked severely to the left. So instead of heading out west, it headed south, flew across the estuary, and nosedived into an area known as by locals as the Silver Strand, which is near a place called Bay Castle, which is now a little restaurant. I was there a few weeks ago. So 80 odd passengers were wiped out immediately.
80.
There was one survivor, and I have the story confirmed from people whose fathers actually picked up this passenger. It was a girl, 26 years of age, a German girl, was found crawling across the mud on her hands and knees. They thought she was impaled in the mud trying to get out.
Wow.
So when they went to lift her, they discovered that her two legs were missing from the knees down. So she was taken across the river to there was no airport hospital, it was an infirmary, right? And they worked on her there. They gave her blood transfusions, emergency surgery, but she actually died in the table. There is another quirk to this story. Now, I could speak about the other stories, but there's an interesting quirk to this story. There was, as I said, a second President Airways flight on the ground at the time. It was a charter from Cornell University, which is Carl Sagan's home university. There was an extremely stunning stewardess on it by the name of Erica Urban. And Erica was on the Cornell flight. She got into Shannon and discovered that the other President Airways flight heading westward was getting ready to leave. She swapped positions from the Cornell charter to the German agricultural charter at a moment's notice, and that change, that fleeting change, was the end of her life. I'm a huge fan of the great George Harrison, the guitar player with the Beatles, and he had a famous saying, and that was, you must remember that in the end of the day, all we are is but shadows on the wall on a sunny day. And it was true for George Harrison. And it's just how quickly life can change in a blink. And that is true of all of the crashes.
And it's true of all of the things we've, the big one in my life, I suppose, is the Twin Towers. And so many stories like that. People who were supposed to be in that day or weren't in that day, or just one little decision made.
Just one little decision will take you either way.
Take you either way and make a huge... Now, that 1961 crash you mentioned there, did that pave the way for the safety record then to change? Was that the turning point, or how did the advancements in safety?
Yeah, by 1961, airlines like President Airlines, they were buying second-hand aircraft from airlines that were moving to jets, which were inherently more reliable. Those airlines were kind of flushed out by this process. Airlines started to consolidate more. The safety record went up a little bit. One of the very interesting disasters was the KLM flight, the Triton, which happened in 1954, and was another gruesome event. The flight took off, captain re-extended the undercarriage, developed drag, and it landed in the middle of the Shannon, broke into three. Passengers in the rear of their aircraft were drowned. Others were asphyxiated by petrol fumes. Some of them made it out onto the tail. Some of them were washed off the tail. But the extraordinary thing about Shannon at the time, and it is shocking, and I'll tell you why, it's 1954, it's the Sunday of the All-Ireland hurling final. The plane crashed. The tower didn't realise that it crashed. With less than 1 mile from that airport, the navigator of the aircraft got out, swam across the river, crawled on mud into the airport. First group of people he saw were Aer Lingus baggage handlers. And he said, "Do you not realise that we've crashed?" And the boys just turned away and they just kept on smoking their cigarettes or whatever. He had to go to the tower to say, "Listen, we've crashed. You need to get some boats out there."
Wow.
But in the meantime, that's 2.5 hours had lapsed. In the meantime, people were freezing to death and drowning out there. It's extraordinary.
So which flight did this come off? You've brought in a very old style, heavy, silver looking, very worn looking.
It is.
American coffee pot.
Myself, my wife scrubbed that for the bones of 3 hours with metal polish. So it's far brighter than it originally was. You notice the side that's turned to you is more mottled, and that's the side that was lit by the flames. Okay.
You'll have to explain this, because this is an amazing piece of history I'm holding.
April 1948, and it's Pan American, a flight that was coming in from London transiting to Shannon and on to New York. It was a round-the-world flight, had come through Karachi and Damascus. Everybody on board that flight was killed, bar one gentleman. His name was Mark Worst, and he was a Lockheed employee. He was travelling on a Lockheed aircraft, a Constellation, an L-49, and it had made an approach to Shannon, aborted the approach, came around a second time. The lights on the instrument panel went out. They got their altitude wrong, and they hit a stone wall 2,300 feet short of the main runway that they were intending to land on. So Mark was the only survivor, and the mind-blowing thing is that his wife was a nurse in Limerick. She was out at the airport to pick him up. She saw the crash happening. So she went with the rescue team across the field, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, expecting her husband to have been consumed in the flames. And she was met by this shadowy figure walking with the flames in the background, and that was her husband. That guy and his wife lived where I grew up, which is on the North Circular Road in Limerick. It's an extraordinary story, but tragically, everybody
this was
else
on
died.
That flight, is that what you're saying?
It was on that flight, and I often wonder...
How have I got it here in front of me now, sitting on the table here?
I often wonder, and I said to my wife on several occasions, I wonder who got the last cup of coffee out of that.
Yeah.
The story behind that was when the documentary went out, I did another radio interview, and a very, very nice couple from West Clare asked to meet me, and they explained that the gentleman's father was an APO, an airport police officer, who went out to the site of the crash and picked that up. But there's a more interesting story, really, because there was another flight in 1960. It was an Italian flight, had started in Naples, Rome, Shannon. I was going transatlantic. That was an aircraft that took off on one of the cross runways, and here's the bit that Hollywood script would, if you were writing for a Hollywood script, they'd turn it down because it was so outlandish. The flight stayed in the air for 40 seconds and it crashed on top of a graveyard. No, that's just totally implausible as a film script. Again, it's like the stone in the pond and the ripples expanding. I got a phone call, a guy and his dad, they were living in somewhere up the Midlands, and he said to me, my dad in his garage has got the wingtip of that aircraft, and it was the wingtip that came down first.
Wow.
It was the one that impacted with the gravestones. And he said, do you want to see it? This is just amazing. So that was a very interesting connection to make. That was a particularly gruesome crash in terms of its the devastating effects on the passengers. There was an awful lot of burn victims that died afterwards. That was the awful story of when they were going through the passenger manifest, they were missing one, they were missing a child. And it went on for weeks, and they were scouring around the fields. There was a kind of a dip. There was a low-lying field beyond the graveyard. And one day, somebody searching found what they thought was... they actually thought it was a rabbit or a hare that was burnt as a result of the crash, because it was, believe it or not, dead sheep everywhere as well. So they took what they thought was the hare to some sort of a forensic facility, and they discovered it was the missing child had been burnt to death. It was just the size of a small ball, just shriveled up.
So of tragic
really,
stories,
when you go,
isn't there?
Again, the further into the research you go, it's with the passage of time we tend to forget these gruesome events.
Yeah,
but that's what they were.
Well, there you have it, and his documentary is available on YouTube. It's called Cleared for Disaster, and that was Peter McGarry there.
Hey guys, we hope everybody out there is doing really, really well, and that so far you're having a terrific new year. Now, you might recall that late last year we brought out the documentary on Shannon Air Crashes, 1946 to 1961. Hot on the heels of that, we did a radio interview with Alan in Clare FM. So once again, thank you, Alan, for that opportunity. And that in itself was enormously productive, and it led to some interesting finds and some new information that we previously didn't have. This time around, we're trying it again, a radio interview, this time with Live 95 FM. And in it, we talked to Anne-Marie, and we will discuss again the air crashes and the history of the air crashes, but also reveal some of the newer information that has sprung free from this. We would like this time again to, I suppose, make an appeal to people that if the radio interview, when you hear it, rings any bells or jogs your memory in relation particular to artefacts. Now, we chased a number of leads. The air crash that would be high on my list in terms of possibly finding any artefacts is the 1954 Triton, the KLM crash, which came down in the middle of the Shannon. We know the wreckage was towed by flotation devices to Ringmoylan Pier. In fact, the marks of the towing are still to be seen on the concrete of the pier. So we suspect that the wreckage of the aircraft wound its way somehow through the small country roads of the time to a scrapyard in Kildimo, which may or may not have been Geraghty's. And it's here that the trail, in effect, runs cold. Because we've got artefacts now from Pan American, which I'll discuss later in the interview, and I'll pop some images right here, and Alitalia, we would like this time to see if we can resurrect anything in relation to KLM Triton. So if the radio interview rings any bells with you or jogs any memories, we leave our contact details. And the purpose of this little video is to take the audio from tomorrow's radio interview with Anne-Marie in Live 95 and put it up here on my YouTube channel so I can spread it further afield for people who may not really already get it on the day. So that's really about it. And it's been a bit of an adventure so far, a learning exercise for me. And let's hope it stays like that. So in the meantime, wherever you are, have a good new year. Take care. And if you've anything to give us, feel free to get in touch. Talk to you soon.